Alrighty, this video is going to cover documentation and individual projects, so this section. For documentation, I have not added anything for this quarter, but I have all the stuff from last quarter, so still setting up a basic scene, describing what a game object is, how to register for all this different stuff, and all the details in there, and then debugging tools, pretty thorough for all that, just don't have stuff from this quarter. For my individual project, I'm just going to start with the diagram and move around. So, UI system. The way that it links into our existing system is that for every scene, there's a UI manager. In scene, sorry, let me back up. So in every scene, there's a UI manager. At any one time, the UI manager just points to one page. A page is something that has lists of UI elements. So it has lists of clickables, hoverables, and drawables. And it's pointers to different objects, different UI elements. And then on every frame, you call UI manager page process elements. And then process elements, you loop through all of your UI drawables and draw all of them. You loop through the hoverables and either call hover or non-hover based on where the mouse is. And then if the mouse has been clicked, you loop through all the clickables and say, hey, the mouse has been clicked, call your onClick function. So that's kind of top level what's going on. Also at the top of the process elements, I've called every frame, you call mouse tracker get cursor. And update mouse X and mouse Y so you can check the clicks and hoverables. The mouse tracker is just a singleton you get the cursor, and it also checks for mouse clicks. So it will detect if the left mouse key was down or was up the last frame and now it's down. That means it's a click, and I'm going to say, hey, yes, there was a mouse click, and then the page will process that click and see where the mouse is, and then call onClick if necessary. So that's kind of top level integration into the system. Also, there's a page null object which inherits from page and has nothing in its process elements, but it's set by default. So that way, even if the user doesn't set a page, page null process elements will be called and just nothing will happen, but nothing will crash. So that's good. In terms of the UI elements themselves, this is a bit of a messy diagram, but let me get situated. So the two main ones are a text block and a button. And basically, these things have different qualities. So clickable, hoverable, and drawable. And I just said UI drawable because we already have a thing called drawable. Those are the three different things that they can be. Basically, a text block is only drawable and hoverable, and then a button is also clickable. Other than that, that's like the main difference between a text block and a button. They are both can be hovered and drawn, but only the button is clickable. So when you implement something that's clickable, you override onClick, and that's what gets called when like the mouse stuff checks out. For hoverable, you override onHover and on non-hover, and that's what gets called, based on the position of the mouse. And then for UI drawable, there's nothing to override because it's just drawing to the screen every time. A UI drawable has two things. It has a rectangle, which is like the background rectangle, and then a string, which is a sprite string. So the rectangle is actually a UI sprite, and it's basically a rect, and it can either have an image or a color. So you can set it to just be like a red rectangle, or you can actually, from the image manager, grab an image and make that cover the rectangle. And UI Sprite is just it inherits from Gemini Sprite, which is what we built last quarter, and I just added in these methods as a UI Sprite just to add some more functionality, but I still wanted all the functionality from Gemini Sprite. So, right. So for a text block and a button, you can set the rect and set the string. All that these does is it propagates down to UI drawable set rect set string, and it also kind of defines the points, the corners of the thing, and for the hoverable it'll set the coordinates, and for clickable, if you're a button, it'll also set the coordinates for clickable. So the clickable knows where the edges of the box are, and it can check every time based on the mouse position. Right, so those are kind of the foundational things. So these are like extra foundational, and then there's text blocks and buttons. And then you can combine text blocks and buttons into panels and then add them to the page. So basically a panel is a way to group text blocks and buttons together. So you have a list of clickables, hoverables, and drawables, and you can add text blocks and buttons and other things to those, and then you can add that whole panel to the page. So you can also reposition the panel. The panels have an X and Y anchor, and you can change the X and Y anchor, so you can change the whole group of things to different parts of the screen. So there are 3 different engine level panels that are like common and useful, but a user could also create their own panel and add it to the page and do whatever they want with it. So I have an example later of a panel that like my quote unquote user created, but these 3 panels are engine level. So progress bar is just a combination of, you can follow these things, it's a combination of 2 text blocks, which is the bar and the fill. There's no text in them, but they're the rectangles, the different color rectangles. There's the background bar and then the sliding bar, I guess. I call it the fill bar. And so you can do all these different things. You can set the rectangle of the whole thing. You can set the fill percent. You can set the fill direction, set the fill color, set the bar color, or get the fill percent. So this is just a progress bar and functionality that would be helpful for a user to have for a progress bar. Up-down value selector is another one that I made. It's basically, I'll show it in a second, but you can, it's like 2 buttons, here, 2 buttons, an up button, a down button, and then a text block, which displays the value. So you can just click up, click down, and change the number inside there. It only deals with ints because it's like just like a counter, but you can do stuff like set the maximum value and the minimum value. You can set how big the whole thing is. You can set the image for the up button or the image for the down button. So like I just chose arrows, but you could choose any image you wanted. So that's that panel. And then the last panel is a radio button group, which is like, it has a list of different, I call them option markers, option buttons, and then option text. So basically, there's like the selector markers on the side, and then the actual text options to the right. And then there's a button covering the whole thing, which if you click on, it'll select the different things. You only have 5, you can only set in a max of 5 options. I could have done some fancier stuff to have a variable number of buttons, but I just went with this for now. And then you can override those different methods. So all of these are virtual, and then you override when you inherit from radio button group, you say what you want to happen when any of those options are selected. And when you add an option, you just add to the last one up to 5. So yeah, and then all of these are panels, so you can create stuff. Like if I was going to create a progress bar, I would create, like it would be class down here, right? And it would inherit from progress bar. I would do whatever I want to it to set it up, and then I would add that panel to my page that I want. So yeah, that's in overall what's happening. I'm going to go down to my test demo to start. So this would be a scene where I'm going to create a page. So I just have random stuff in the scene, doesn't really matter. And then I am going to create a page, and all I have to do is on the scene, set the current page to that page. And that's all I have to do from a user side to set up the page. In test page, I create the different stuff. So I create a text block. The text block inherits from text block and is just normal. I have an on hover and on non-hover that I implement. So I'm just changing the color. If I go back to the page, that's the text block. I have a button, where I set the rect, I set the color, I set the string, add it as a drawable and a clickable. So for instance, if you wanted to create a button, but you didn't want it to be drawable to start, or sorry, you didn't want it to be clickable at first, you could like not set it as clickable, and then, you know, later on in the game when something happens, then you can add it to the clickable list, and then it will be active as a clickable. So you can like remove and change those as needed. Here's a new progress bar. So the test progress bar inherits from progress bar. And so that way I get all this functionality. I can set everything I want, and then I add that whole panel to the page. I have an up-down value selector as well. And in here, I set everything up. Super easy. And then last thing is the radio button group. And when I create that, I set the XY anchor, I set the images for the selected and deselected, I set the marker size. I'm actually gonna make this smaller because it's like huge. I set the different options and the text blocks. I'm gonna come back to this a little later, but here is what happens when all the different options are selected. Yeah, so I'm just going to run this demo. Right, so I'm going to move around. So I've showed this a couple times, but up-down value selector super easy. I think I have a minimum of -3 and a maximum of 5. The buttons are just colored buttons, actually, in this example, instead of images. I have hover. I have text justification as well, so it's in the top right. I have the different radio buttons, and you can see the output. So I did 1, 2, and then 3. If I go back to 2, oops. Yeah, I think that's right. And then if I'm clicking, I actually have the button hooked up to the progress bar, so it changes the fill based on that. So yeah, this demo isn't too interesting, but it just shows that everything works. In terms of my actual game, I'm going to show the stuff I did for that, because I made things a little more complicated with page switching as well. So I'm going to change this to my game, and I need to remember to do this. Okay, so here I have my game. So I'm gonna minimize this, go to user code, different pages. Right, so this is my first scene, which is my start end scene, and I create these different pages, and I set the current page to be the starting page. So the starting page has a text block, title text block, and then 2 buttons, the level settings button and the start button. So that's what these are. These are hoverable. If you go to level settings, you have the text block, well, 3 text blocks up here. You have a radio button group right here, and then an up-down value selector here. So you can change this to whatever you want. I'll just change it to 2, and then I'll change the color to be orange. And then I also have a back button that takes you back to the start page. If I press start, then the game actually starts, and I change to my in-game page. So I'm going to pause for a second. Oops, does it not work? I don't know. But when I switch to the in-game page, I have several different things. I have the health bar, which is a progress bar. I have the shield bar on the right, which is also a progress bar. I have the shield button, which is a button where I set the images to be the different colored shields. And then the objectives panel, which is, like I was talking about, a user-defined panel. So it's basically just a collection. I have a list or a vector of text blocks. And then I can add stuff to it. And then I can add that to the UI drawable list for this panel, which will then add it to the pages list of UI drawables. So yeah, it's just a user-defined panel. Right. If I continue, does that work? Right. So yeah, the objectives can be edited right here dynamically using the like screen log thing we used earlier to do a formatted string. And this button also works, the shield works, so if I press the shield, then the planes will not hurt me anymore. Yeah, so that was a very long video, but it showcases all the different UI stuff that I built. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to mention. In terms of the internals, stuff that I did to try to be more optimal was, if I go into my UI system and tools, I have recycling pools for the graphics object sprites, the recs, and the sprite strings that I'm using, because I was newing and deleting those a lot, and now I'm just recycling all of them. Something I noticed was that a lot of the time I just wanted to build a text block around a string. So I made, if I go here, if I go to my start page, the title text block, I was like, I just want like Toy Take Cack, and I just want like a box around it with some padding. So I made this function called build sprite to fit string, which takes a string and the padding you want and then builds a rectangle around it, and then you can position it wherever you want. So that was helpful. I just like get the width of the string and set the color to be transparent to start. So that was a nice thing I added. And then for progress bar, you can fill things in different directions. So I just thought that would be a helpful thing to have. So I used a strategy pattern. And this switch is just for setting the direction. And then once you have the direction set, all you have to do is call get fill rect, or sorry, yeah. Here's the base class. And yeah, get fill rect is what all the different options implement. And that'll give you the right rect and draw the right rect for the different fill directions. And then the other thing I added was for panels. I think I mentioned this already, but I realized it would be helpful to be able to move things around with an XY anchor. So you can give it a certain XY anchor and it will find the delta and then adjust everything accordingly. And since these are just pointers that the page already has, it'll just move the objects themselves, and then the page will be fine because it's just pointing to those objects. Two kind of issues that are still with the system is that there's not really a way to size text at all. Since we're using the sprite fonts, and the sprite fonts have the size kind of inherent to them. I'm not scaling text at all, so in theory you could make a box, like a small box, and then have the text like extend beyond the box, and the engine's not going to do anything to help you. So that would be a good thing to add. And then another thing is you have to set the rect before you do anything else. So for instance, when I'm making this initial text block, if I tried to, so I'm creating this text block, if I tried to set the string before I set the rect, it would crash, which is not great, but I just realized that when I'm setting the string, I like already need to know where to put it. So yeah, that's something that I could work around if I did a little more, if I worked on it a little more, but it was easier for now to just have the user set the rect first and then do everything else they need to do. In terms of what didn't make it in, two things that I think would be my next steps would be first, like a kind of a click and drag feature, like pulling, like you'd be able to pull across on bars or volume buttons or something. Having that be like an engine level way to get that user input would be helpful for a UI system for sure. And then also some more aesthetic stuff like adding black outlines or like simple shadows wouldn't be too hard to implement. You'd kind of just add another rect that would size around your current one as needed. That was something I thought, like I had a plan for how I would do that, but just didn't get to it. So those would be the next two things I would do. I think it's pretty simple to use. The most irritating part about it is putting the plugins to your own code. I had to do a lot of pointer passing. Um, like for instance, for the back button on the level settings page, um, if I can find it, level setting page, element back button. Like I needed a way to actually go back to the starting page, so I had to have a pointer to the starting page so that I could get back there. Um, yeah, so it was just a matter of putting in those plugins that was like kind of hard from a user perspective. Not hard, but just annoying. Yeah, so that was so long, but that is everything about my UI system.